line which ended up in the final version of the film.
Just pick up any 3 objects.
That's a test? Hey, where were you guys when I did my CPA? Sorry.
But the main improv talent was Guy Pearce. He and Tobolowsky improvised every black and white scene. Later, he went to the studio to record the internal monologue parts, and Nolan gave him complete creative freedom.
Do I know this guy? He seems to know me.
The majority of these lines were also made up on the fly.
Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
Nolan's experience of backyard filmmaking, with a small budget, helped him to film the picture in 25 days while driving around the outskirts of Los Angeles.
What are you talking about? These tracks are only a few days old.
Tracks? What are you, Pocahontas?
The main location was a motel. Nolan chose it because of its confusing layout, which reflected the complexity of the film.
So how many rooms am I checked into in this shithole?
Just 2. So far.
Well, at least you're being honest about ripping me off.
Well, you're not going to remember anyway.
Over 100 time jumps in Memento. The beginning is shown in the middle, while the first scene is actually the end. The events of this scene, while the sound effects play in the correct order. The reverse processing of the Polaroid is a metaphor for Leonard's fading memory. For those viewers who did not appreciate the creative editing, the film in chronological order was added to a collector's edition DVD, though in order to watch it, you had to pass a memory test. By the way, the Honda Civic in this scene next to the main character's car is the director's own, the very car in which Christopher and Jonathan gave birth to Memento. The film is full of similar symbolic details, from the tattoo salon named in honor of Emma Thomas, to Teddy's number which coincides with Marla Singer's from Fight Club. Nolan added a myriad of interesting details for attentive viewers.
You bluff it to seem less of a freak.
Nolan spent 6 months editing with Dottie Dorn, and a year later, their work will be dubbed a breakthrough in the film industry.
Black and white scenes, they run forwards. If you stick them together, they actually overlap in the same way that the backwards scenes overlap.
Who is this?
At this point, there was still no talk of a premiere. Because he didn't have enough money, Chris was forced to cut out a few songs from the soundtrack. He had dreamed of incorporating Radiohead's Paranoid Android into the finale. But the rights to it cost more than all the other songs on the soundtrack put together.
Somebody's gotta pay, Lenny. Somebody always pays.
It took 6 months of preparation for Memento to premiere ready, because of the difficult plotline and lack of famous names on the bill. During this time, they switched distributors countless times. In the end, Newmarket had to take the distribution upon itself for the first time. This risky move exceeded all expectations. The film made over $40 million and brought fame to all who took part in it.
Thank you.
Christopher was especially pleased by the praise from neurophysiologists, who said that Memento depicted memory and its functions better than any other artistic work.
I've told you this before, haven't I?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to mess with you, but it's so weird.
Chris spent the spring and summer of 2001 at festivals and going on a promotion tour. At the beginning of the next year, went to the Golden Globes and the Oscars, where he was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. Technically, he should have been nominated for the Best Adapted Screenplay, but wasn't, because Jonathan only published Memento Mori in Esquire magazine 2 months after the film came out. Fortunately, Nolan did not receive a single statuette.
Yeah, it's tough. It's almost impossible.
But if we fast forward, we find out that 15 years later, Memento will be inducted into the National Film Registry, because the Library of Congress recognized it as being of cultural, aesthetic, and historical value.
Well, remember!
When it's done, I will know. It'll be different.
Well, I thought so too. In fact, I was sure of it, but you didn't!
The success of the film gave Christopher his first fans, among which was Academy Award-winning Steven Soderbergh. He was so impressed by the work of the whole team that he suggested Nolan film a remake of the Norwegian thriller, Insomnia. Warner Brothers had already agreed to invest $50 million in the project, and the main roles were to be played by Al Pacino, Hilary Swank, and Robin Williams. No wonder the studio wasn't thrilled by Nolan's candidacy. The big bosses wanted an experienced big-name director. But Soderbergh stood his ground for Nolan. Even when Nolan said he wouldn't participate, unless Wally Pfister and Dottie Dorn were coming with him. After 3 years in Los Angeles, Chris became the director of a multi-million-dollar studio film production. Before leaving for location in Canada, Nolan rewrote the screenplay, got rid of some grisly scenes, altered the motives behind the characters, and changed the finale. Thanks to Chris's involvement, the story acquired a Hitchcock-like atmosphere and focused on the surreal experiences of the main character. But he still wasn't credited as one of the screenwriters.
Why?
Chris and Al Pacino interviewed dozens of people suffering from insomnia and developed a visual style based on their stories. Another interesting fact is that the main character's last name, Dormer, means to sleep in Spanish and French.
I spent my life doing this. My life.
While the set was being built on the outskirts of Vancouver, Pfister and Nolan spent 2 long days flying over the forests of Alaska, where they filmed the sweeping landscape scenes for the movie. After that, they traveled to British Columbia, which impressed them with its amazing views and wild nature. As they were filming in the forest, there was an avalanche nearby, which made it into the footage of Wally Pfister's assistant.
Out of the lake house. It's the raising water levels that'll be a problem.
As for the episode in the fog, that turned out to be an incredible obstacle. There wasn't a single road leading to the location, so the team had to move the equipment on a rented barge.
You'll see we brought barges into this location, created this huge base camp there.
While decorations were delivered in more than 50 runs by helicopter, the chase scenes were set on rocky ground, so they had to build special rails and platforms for the cameras to sit on. Then, of course, there was the fog itself. In order to create it, there were technicians with fog machines walking the shoreline while boats circled nearby with more serious tech. They spent only a week at that location. It was clear that after decades of working with so few resources, this new approach was exhilarating for Nolan.
Because he felt the freedom to be able to go 360 degrees with the camera in the fog, which I think is liberating for everybody.
It took them 2 months to film, and Christopher received invaluable experience from people who are experts in their fields.
I know this isn't easy for you, but I'm trying to get you to understand we're in the same situation here.
Every scene with Pacino and Williams was like an acting lesson. Especially compelling were the phone conversations.
Who am I speaking to?
You get rid of your clock yet? Won't really help. When I first moved up here, I once went 5 nights. Can you believe that?
And the river chase scenes. Filming finished in July of 2001, and then Christopher and Dottie Dorn spent over 6 months editing.
I had to make sure you'd follow through. I know this is hard for you.
Sacrifice my shot. Oh darling, won't you look at me? I can't take this uncertainty, but I'll buckle down before I leave.
The film premiered on the 24th of May, 2002.
I have that voice. Annunziato! Mandalaro Galagisto.
And it immediately received hundreds of rave reviews. Even Eric Skjoldbjerg, the director and co-creator of the original Insomnia film, hailed the remake as quality work with talented directing. The next 6 months brought Insomnia commercial success, over $100 million to be exact.
And?
The studio was so inspired by the young director's triumph that to this day, Warner Brothers is behind every film Nolan makes.
Feels good to talk about that stuff. I'm able to sleep now.
Christopher spent the next half year writing a new project. He was enraptured by the biography of Howard Hughes and Hollywood's golden age. He had already invited Jim Carrey to play the main role and had practically finished the script when he found out that an identical story had already gotten the green light.
God, all that Hollywood talk bores me silly. As if there aren't more important things in the world. Mussolini, for one.
Martin Scorsese's Aviator completely obliterated Nolan's idea. And yes, while it's true that this kind of thing often happens in Hollywood, Nolan was astounded at the coincidence.
I was definitely like, fuck, I think it's the best script I've ever written, and I had a really wonderful experience writing it.
Chris bid adieu to Hughes's biography and began to toy with the idea of a film about dreams. A multi-layered narrative made it difficult to complete, and the project dragged on for 8 years, but more on that later. Meanwhile, Warner was itching to get their young talent into the director's chair again, and offered him the opportunity to direct the epic action, Troy. But the historical drama did not tempt Nolan, and it was directed by Wolfgang Peterson. Later, Christopher began working on an adaptation of the novel, The Keys to the Street, but stopped early on because he felt that the book was too similar to his previous films. It took another 1.5 years of searching to find an unexpected idea which he stuck with. Back in 1999, when Christopher wasn't even dreaming of working with Warner and was enjoying the meager success of his first film, the studio was preparing a reboot of the Batman franchise. Darren Aronofsky was to direct. Clint Eastwood was to be invited to play Bruce Wayne, and Frank Miller, who had authored a series of Batman comics, was to write the screenplay. The script included a homeless Bruce Wayne and an Alfred, who was a black auto mechanic, Big Al for short. The story itself was to take place in Tokyo. This flight of fancy scared the big guys at Warner and blocked the script. Aronofsky left the project to film Requiem for a Dream. He was supposed to be replaced by the Wachowski sisters, and they even worked on their own version for the piece. But then they decided to focus on the sequels to The Matrix. When Christopher came to the studio 6 months later, with his vision of the Batman universe, it caused the studio to entrust the project to the ambitious novice. The director wanted to depict Batman realistically and turn it into a noir crime trilogy. In order to adapt the comics to the screen, he needed the help of an expert in that field, and Warner hired David Goyer, whose name was closely associated with the success of The Crow, Dark City, and Blade.
You might like it.
Nolan, Goyer, and production designer Nathan Crowley, who had become friends with Nolan on the set of Insomnia, shut themselves off in Chris's garage for the next 6 weeks.
It was in August in LA, in the garage, with the washing machines, so we had to take the day off when the cleaner came around because they'd leave the dryers on and get way too hot.
During that time, they wrote the script, developed the visual style, and basic storyboard. After that, David went off to film Blade Trinity, and Christopher finished the script by himself. Since he was afraid of the plot being leaked, he demanded that the executives at Warner have the first read-through in his very garage.
It was very important to me that nobody see anything of what we were doing until it was finished.
Because of similar fears, Nolan to this day doesn't use mobile phones or email. Despite this slight paranoia and strange meeting place, the producers loved his work, especially his idea to remove the R rating from the picture.
Not the youngest kids, obviously. I think what we've done is probably a bit intense for them. But I certainly didn't want to exclude the sort of 10 to 12-year-olds. Because as a kid, I would have loved to have seen a movie like this.
And well, Batman got the green light, and Warner set aside $150 million for the creation of the film. Now the director faced the most difficult casting of his life. The studio wanted Nolan to choose Ashton Kutcher for the lead, but Chris convinced them to not choose a comedic actor for the noir thriller.
Shut up, dude!
Afterward, they auditioned dozens of actors, from young talents like Heath Ledger to the seasoned David Duchovny. Heath and Chris both admitted, by the way, that the lead role was not a good fit, but agreed to work together in the future. Nolan could not decide between 6 options. Goyer's favorite, Jake Gyllenhaal, a suitable match like Henry Cavill, Billy Crudup, Joshua Jackson, or Cillian Murphy, and Christian Bale, who had especially impressed with their acting. The director invited them all to a group audition, where he immediately came to a decision.
Name?
Bruce Wayne.
Bale received the lead role.
Well, a guy dresses up like a bat clearly has issues.
But Nolan was so impressed with Murphy's talent that he offered him the role of Scarecrow, Batman's arch-enemy.
Would you like to see my mask?
Before Murphy, the role was supposed to be given to either Ewan McGregor or Marilyn Manson.
I respect the mind's power over the body. It's why I do what I do.
The search for the supporting roles occurred simultaneously. None of the candidates were told they were filming Batman, since they simply received a script entitled The Intimidation Game. Michael Caine, for example, thought that it was a movie about gangsters.
Anyway.
Caine agreed to play Alfred the butler, only because of his desire to work with Christopher Nolan. The actor was inspired by the young director's talent, and was showering him with compliments before filming even started. His intuition did not fail him, it would seem, since afterward, Michael made an appearance in every film Christopher would make.
Very well.
Lucius Fox was almost played by Lawrence Fishburne, but David Goyer convinced everyone to add Morgan Freeman to the cast, because he had written the part with him in mind.
I think I have just the thing.
Though Freeman was a Batman fan and had read the comics since he was 9 years old, he only found out about the existence of his character when he read the script.
That won't stop a man like you now, would it?
I suppose not.
The character Rachel Dawes was not in the original graphic novels. She was written specifically based on Katie Holmes, who gladly joined the project.
We have the best of the best people working on this movie, so it's like, wow, okay. What do I do now?
Christopher had wanted to give the role of Henry Ducard to Guy Pearce, but no one supported his idea. The actor was considered to be too young.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Then, the creators came across Gary Oldman, who had many similar roles under his belt.
This case is empty.
I really don't know what this situation is about.
It was no surprise that Gary refused, saying he was tired of playing villains. Chris then suggested he play one of the good guys, and the actor agreed without even reading the script.
You're just one man. Now we're two. We.
In the end, Liam Neeson landed the role of Ducard, and was glad to play a villain for a change.
Crime cannot be tolerated. Criminals thrive on the indulgence of society's understanding.
There are a few more interesting people worth mentioning. Chris's uncle, John Nolan, played Bruce Wayne's uncle.
The party's over. Get out.
The apple has fallen very far from the tree, Mr. Wayne.
And small roles were also given to stars from Christopher's first films. Jeremy Theobald.
Jesus, the pressure, it's spiking. Right there.
And Lucy Russell.
But he's put Falcone behind bars.
And now the cops want to bring him in, so what does that tell you?
They're jealous.
It took about a year to cast the film, but the preparation process allowed them not to rush, because it took them 10 months just to build a set in the biggest hangar in the world.
When we first started looking at Cardington, I think that there was probably a certain amount of skepticism from everybody, really, because it wasn't a ready-made stage by any means.
Batman's cave received special attention. In previous films, it had been created thanks to a combination of decorations and backdrops. This time, it was created for real.
Charming.
For the first time, Gotham City was filmed not in a pavilion, but outside on real streets. Though the prototype for the city is New York, it was filmed in London and Chicago. Chicagoans were especially unimpressed with the opportunity to see a film in production. The main streets got jammed with traffic for hours because of the Batmobile, which Nolan called a crazy cross between a Hummer and a Lamborghini.
What's that? Oh, the tumbler? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that.
In order to avoid a collision, it had to move at a very slow pace. Nonetheless, that didn't keep it from getting in an accident. A drunk driver crashed into an expensive piece of set, thinking that the Batmobile was some kind of alien invasion.
At least tell me what it looks like. Never mind.
Another car of note in the film was the Lamborghini Murcielago.
Nice car.
You should see my other one.
Murcielago happens to mean bat in Spanish. The day before they started filming, Christopher got his team together and turned on Blade Runner. After the screening, he said that's how he wanted their movie to look. In addition, his love for Blade Runner was the reason the director invited Rutger Hauer to act in the movie.
Bill? And what's a big shot like you doing in a place like this?
The cameras began rolling on the 3rd of March, 2004. Nolan refused to use a second unit, which most blockbusters use, because he wanted to personally control every shot filmed and only trusted Wally Pfister.
The first week of production was like being thrown into combat. Who did a fabulous job, but we were all kind of thrown into the mud, wind, ice, rain, hail, whatever was hitting us there.
Another one of his unique preferences, minimum CGI. Graphics increased the quality of special effects, but replaced them only a few times. Using a computer, they created the view of the League of Shadows hideout and the bats called by sonar. Every scene that had less of them involved real bats.
Blessed bat again, sir. They nest somewhere in the grounds.
The main problem with the fight scenes was Liam Neeson's height. During the ninja segment, the extras had to be placed on pedestals, but towards the end of the film, Liam used a simpler technique. Christopher just asked him to slouch. The lead actors performed their own stunts. Only after they finished filming the sequences, they were replaced by stuntmen who were used to film the long shots. As for the fight scenes with Batman, Nolan preferred to film them from the perspective of the bad guys. This resulted in scenes brimming with suspense and fear, where the viewer felt the terror of the villains, instead of your classic fight sequences. Besides, it's hard not to notice that Batman never once actually hits an opponent in the shot. No, this was not on purpose. It was the result of a dynamic editing on the part of Lee Smith, who went on to work with Nolan for 7 more films after this one. Hans Zimmer became another consistent colleague for years after, when he agreed to compose the soundtrack for Batman, on the condition that he could work with James Newton Howard. The composers had been looking for a project to collaborate on for several years, and the dual nature of the movie's main character seemed like the perfect opportunity to them. Every composition is named after a type of bat, and the first letters of tracks 4 through 9 actually spell out the word Batman.
Nice.
So the film was shot, edited, and promoted for a record-breaking $100 million. Warner Brothers bet on Nolan's talent and were not disappointed.
This year, Batman Begins is the Batman movie I've been waiting for and hoping for. It's one of the year's best films.
Your theatrics made an impression.
Sure, the movie only made $370 million, which wasn't much considering the budget, but it got the best reviews of any Batman franchise film ever and numerous award nominations. Wally Pfister was even nominated for an Oscar for Best Cinematography. The movie's strongest aspect is its realism. The plot shed light on Batman's origin, his cool gadgets, the hero's motives, as well as the character and psychology behind the Dark Knight.
Bruce, why do we fall?
By the way, it was Batman Begins that inspired Michael Wilson, and Barbara Broccoli to launch the James Bond remakes. Hollywood was amazed by Christopher's courage, which allowed him to make the film based on what he would want to watch himself.
I made Batman the way I made every other film, and I've done it to my own satisfaction. Because the film, truly, is exactly the way I wanted it to be. You rarely hear something like that for a film this big. As an independent filmmaker, I've been in a position where I'm making a film no one will want to see. No one will care if I finish it, so you have to develop your own motivation, your own reasons for doing what you do. You have to be making a film simply because it needs to be made. You're not looking for approval. When you do something you love, you don't question it.
Okay, say action.
Action.
In order to talk about the next project, let's rewind to 6 years ago.
Like that.
The year 1999. Our young director was almost finished editing Memento, while tapes of his first film were traveling the globe. On another continent, the writer Christopher Priest was gearing up to sell the film adaptation rights of his novel The Prestige to Sam Mendes, the director whose American Beauty had just been nominated for 7 Oscars. The deal was all but signed when Christopher received a package in the mail containing a tape of the following.
And that's when I started shadowing.
Shadowing?
Shadowing, following. I started to follow people.
Nolan's style won the author over in the first minutes, and he passed on the famous director and decided to go with Nolan, who was practically unknown at the time. Only Nolan had no idea. A few months later, he was presenting Memento in London, and only then got around to reading The Prestige. The novel amazed Christopher, and he and his brother started working on the screenplay immediately. A year later, the rights to The Prestige were bought by Aaron Ryder, the same producer who had been the first to appreciate Memento. So Chris got the chance to direct the mystical thriller, but for most of 2002, he was editing and promoting Insomnia. So, he entrusted the screenplay to his brother.
You have such a surplus of ideas, so many to work with. It really was just a question of choosing the ones I liked the best.
The younger Nolan rewrote the text while Batman was being filmed, and Christopher started looking for the lead actors and drafting the set. The first person chosen was Hugh Jackman.
Have you settled on a name? Yes, I have. The Great Danton.
The director thought it was a shame that the actor had only been shot in action and comedy films, and that this role was his opportunity to demonstrate his dramatic potential. Hugh accepted and brought a lot of innovations to the role, while drawing inspiration from the famous illusionist Channing Pollock. However, the screenplay allowed Jackman certain comedic freedom, which he used since he was playing Robert Angier, as well as Gerald Root.
Do you think you were unique, Mr. Angier? I have been Caesar. I played Faust. How difficult could it possibly be to play the Great Danton?
For the role of the antagonist, Nolan was planning on having an audition to choose between 10 candidates, and Bale was not among them. Christian read the novel, and later when he met with Chris, told him about his unique take on Alfred Borden.
But the point is that a real magician tries to invent something new that other magicians are going to scratch their heads over, you know?
This discussion captivated Nolan, and he cast his main characters. The casting continued smoothly, and Michael Caine agreed to his role without even reading the script.
Good rehearsal space. Line stagehands, I like it. You always had a good eye for publicity.
Next, the ensemble was joined by Rebecca Hall.
How's that?
And Scarlett Johansson.
You here to steal the rest of my show?
No, I'm here to give your show what it's missing.
Yeah? What might that be?
Me.
As for Nikola Tesla, Christopher only ever had one person in mind. Since he needed extraordinary charisma, not acting experience, he approached the musical legend, David Bowie.
He seemed to be the only actor capable of playing the part. He had that requisite iconic status, and he was a figure as mysterious as Tesla needed to be.
Despite the director's enthusiasm, the singer refused. Nolan then traveled to New York and insisted that they meet in person. 2 minutes after shaking hands, Bowie acquiesced.
Go home. Forget this thing. I can recognize an obsession. No good will come of it.
Tesla's assistant was played by Andy Serkis, who described his character with great insight, saying that Mr. Ali was the mirror image of John Cutter.
Exactly.
The comparison hints at the fact that the story of the battle between the two illusionists is an allusion to the struggle between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. The ruined presentation in London and the fire in Colorado, which carried out by the same person, are similar to the methods of the main characters.
There simply is too much magic for my stage at the Pantages across the street.
The Prestige is a battle of the minds set in the industrial boom era, which lent the film a special charm.
Man's reach exceeds his imagination.
Nathan Crowley worked with Christopher for the third time. In 5 years, he went from decorating the hotel room of Will Dormer to creating the backstages of theaters, streets of London, and Nikola Tesla's lab. Nathan outdid himself. Together with Julie Oshapinti, they created an entire world. In fact, Jonathan Nolan was so impressed that 10 years later, he would enlist them to work on his own project, a TV series entitled Westworld, where they would again create something incredible. Another important aspect of the film's atmosphere was the ties to the world of illusionists. We'll start with the most obvious, the cameo of the popular magician, Ricky Jay, who also taught Bale and Jackman a few tricks.
Are you watching closely?
Then there was the code hidden in the names of the main characters. The first 2 letters of each name form the word Abra, the beginning of the famous phrase, abracadabra.
Do you have anything to say?
Also, almost all the famous illusions of the late 19th century were depicted in the film.
One, two, three.
And lastly, Alfred's prison number, D23, is an allusion to a Disney fan club of the same name, which refers to the date when Disney Studios was created. This detail appeared as a result of the collaboration between Warner Brothers and Touchstone Pictures, which belongs to the aforementioned mega corporation.
The trick was too good, it was too simple.
And now for the most obscure illusion.
If you want to see what it takes to make real magic, go to the Tenley. There's a Chinaman there, and he really has what it takes.
Chung Ling Soo.
Chung Ling Soo was an illusionist created by William Ellsworth Robinson. At the beginning of the 20th century, audiences were dazzled by anything exotic. So, Robinson decided to pretend to be an old Chinese magician. Chung became wildly popular, and William never broke character in public. He died in March of 1919, when he failed to catch a bullet as part of a magic trick.
Bullet catch is suicide. All it takes is some smart-ass volunteer to put a button in the barrel.
His last words were, "Oh my God, something's happened. Lower the curtain," were the first English words he had uttered in public in 20 years. This is the kind of mastery of the trade that Nolan exhibits in his films. The self-abandon of the main characters is a reflection of the director's own passion for his profession.
It's the only way to escape all this.
They finished filming in April of 2006, and for 3 long months, Chris and Lee Smith worked their magic on some very difficult editing.
Now, you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it.
The narrative jumped in time 100 times, which meant an average of once a minute.
But here at the turn, I must leave you bored.
The transition style between scenes was consistent with Nolan's first movies, and turned the thriller into 2 hours of pure suspense. The premiere was in October of the same year. The $40 million movie didn't amaze at the box office, but at least it broke even. Wally Pfister, Nathan Crowley, and Julie Oshipinti received well-earned Oscar nominations. The Prestige earned flattering reviews from critics. Not only did the acting, decorations, and cinematography receive attention, but so did Christopher. The confusing narrative with time became a beautifully intricate puzzle thanks to the director, who adapted an incredibly difficult story for the screen as though it were a comic strip.
It was the greatest magic trick I've ever seen.
But it was soon to return to the real graphic novels. Even as the first Batman was being made, the studio approved plans for the trilogy.
I didn't have any intention of making a sequel, and I was quite surprised finding myself wanting to do it. I just got caught up in the process of imagining how you would see a character like the Joker, through the prism of what we did in the first film.
After the success of their previous work, Christopher invited his brother to write the screenplay. Together, they decided that the text should be based on the original Batman comics and asked Jerry Robinson for help. He is the man historians call the creator of the Joker. Christopher envisioned his antagonist prototype being based on the main character of the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, while Fritz Lang's work was the source of the inspiration for the main character.
Die Augen, sie leben einförmlich.
The film inherited its main idea from the criminal thriller Heat. Specifically, The Black Knight borrowed the idea of the relationship between the main characters, two irreconcilable heroes who are at the same time very similar to each other.
I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best, trying to stop guys like me.
William Fichtner was even offered a role because of his work in Michael Mann's thriller.
Sure, you got a deal.
You have any idea who you're stealing from? You and your friends are dead!
He's out, right?
The masks which the robbers use are a connection to Stanley Kubrick's debut film, The Killing. When writing The Dark Knight, the Nolans avoided using most of their typical moves, like flashbacks, time jumps, or even riddles. They showed the audience who is behind the villains at the very beginning.
I'll look into it.
Instead of an increasingly suspenseful narrative, the story focuses on the psychology of the characters.
I have enough blood on my hands. And I've seen now what I would have to become to stop men like him.
Of course, in order for this to work, the actors had to be perfectly chosen, so the casting was vital to the movie's success. Warner Brothers was able to keep all of the actors from the first film, except for Katie Holmes, who wanted to take part in the crime comedy Mad Money.
So why not?
Why not seems like a really bad reason to do something, don't you think?
Why?
It was thought her role would go to Emily Blunt or Rachel McAdams, but eventually it was given to Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Did you mean it?
Yes.
The switch didn't particularly bother fans, but Maggie recounts that she was initially frightened by the scope of the blockbuster and the extreme stunts, since she had only starred in smaller independent films.
All right. Let's not do that again.
Before the release of Batman Begins, David Goyer had planned on dedicating a film each to the Joker and Harvey Dent. But after the Nolan brothers combined them into one film, they had to find two equally incredible actors simultaneously. The director wanted the district attorney to be played by Matt Damon, but was unable to convince him because he decided to act in Steven Soderbergh's The Informant.
I did the right thing.
Hugh Jackman was interested in the role, but after seeing Thank You for Smoking, Christopher realized that Harvey could be perfectly played by Aaron Eckhart, who reminded the director of a young Robert Redford.
Things are worse than ever.
Yes, they are. But the night is darkest just before the dawn.
The actor had wanted to play in Nolan's film 8 years prior in Memento, and agreed without even reading the script.
Okay, fine. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Aaron based his persona on Robert Kennedy, whose career and thirst for revenge reminded him of Harvey Dent.
Mr. Dent, how does it feel to be the biggest hero in Gotham?
No, I'm no hero. Gotham's finest, they're the heroes.
David Goyer, by the way, always maintained that Harvey was the main character of The Dark Knight.
Just tell me it's not Wayne, the guy's a complete...
As for the Joker, Christopher had chosen the actor 3 years earlier. From their first meeting, he planned to invite Heath Ledger to the cast, and after seeing Brokeback Mountain, couldn't imagine anyone else. Such a lack of vanity. This was an actor who wasn't afraid to bury himself in his character to a massive extent. Yes, people were perplexed at my choice, but it was the easiest decision of my directing career.
Me?
Surprisingly, when the film was announced, the press judged Christopher's choice to be unfortunate, especially since Robin Williams, Paul Bettany, Adrian Brody, and Steve Carell had all shown public interest in the role.
I thought my jokes were bad.
Nolan spoke to all the candidates, but their manners seemed to imitate Jack Nicholson's, whose performance is considered to be iconic.
Crying. You might join me for a week.
Ledger, on the other hand, presented a fresh interpretation.
Let her go.
Very poor choice of words.
To get in character, he spent 2 weeks locked in a hotel room, developing his speech.
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Go back to ripping off mob dealers? No.
Movement and gesticulation.
Well, hello, beautiful. You must be Harvey Squeeze.
The actor drew inspiration from Alex of A Clockwork Orange, and from members of the Sex Pistols.
But now, like, we're facing a cheapskate comedy interrogation act, and it just ain't on, pal. It's a joke. It's a farce.
Why don't you give me a call when you want to start taking things a little more seriously? Here's my card.
His famous way of licking his lips was something discovered on set. Intricate makeup, including the silicone scar, was always threatening to slide off into his mouth. The slight swish of the tongue would return it to its place.
Their code. It's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble.
The idea for the makeup was derived from Eric Draven from the cult film The Crow. And the artist Connor O'Sullivan based the actual scars on real photos of people who wore the Glasgow smile. In the movie, the Joker shares 2 legends about the origin of the cuts.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got these scars? So I had a wife. She was beautiful. Like you. My father was a drinker and a fiend. Who tells me I worry too much? Who tells me I ought to smile more? He comes at me with the knife. Why so serious? I just want to see her smile again. I just want her to know that I don't care about the scars. He sticks the blade in my mouth. Let's put a smile on that face.
Chris added these lines to the screenplay in order to underline the fact that the Joker doesn't actually have a backstory. He represents the power of pure anarchy.
Chaos. I'm an agent of chaos.
Ledger amazed every member of the cast. Bale was shocked by the interrogation scene, when Heath asked Christian to hit him with all his strength.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy.
In the finale, when the Joker had already named the addresses, Batman hits him a few more times. Nolan used this moment to show that the hero had lost his sense of right and wrong and committed an act of senseless violence. But during editing, the last few shots were left out, so as not to make it seem that Batman himself had turned evil.
To them, you're just a freak. Like me.
Even when the experienced Michael Caine met the Joker for the first time, he was genuinely frightened. According to the script, he was to be greeting guests at the elevator, when instead of a bunch of moneybags, a gang of clowns entered. The butler forgot all his lines.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Before Ledger was cast, Caine tried to convince Nolan to choose a different villain because he feared no one would be able to get out from under Nicholson's shadow. However, when Chris told him who would be playing the part, Kane predicted that the world would receive a new movie icon.
This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Christopher controlled every aspect of the picture. It was all the more surprising, therefore, that he entrusted Ledger with the shooting of the scenes depicting the torture of the Batman impersonators.
People will die. Starting tonight. I'm a man of my word.
Ledger brought many improvisations to the picture, from the applause in the jail cell, which the filming crew almost missed, to his reaction to the hospital explosion. There is a legend that during the explosion, the detonator truly didn't go off. Heath's improvisation turned a failed take, which could have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, into a moment of genius. Chris insisted that the explosion be real, so they used a deserted chocolate factory, which the producers spent over a half a year looking for. Before it was destroyed, decorators turned the factory into Gotham General. However, a few days before shooting, the set was robbed of all its top-floor windows. In order to cover that up, Nolan had to add CGI, despite all his best efforts to avoid it. But let's go back a few months. The casting and set were finished by the middle of April 2007, but during the first 3 days of filming, the team didn't shoot a single take. Instead of working on set, Nolan held a movie marathon where he presented the films which were to set the tone for The Black Knight. Included in the lineup were Heat, Citizen Kane, A Clockwork Orange, Stalag 17, and Batman Begins. What followed was a 6-month filming marathon, with stints in the US, UK, and Hong Kong. Nolan's obsession with live action reached its peak in The Dark Knight. CGI was only used to enhance the viewer's experience, but wild chases, explosions, and fight scenes were created by an incredible team of pyrotechnics and stunt coordinators. Now a little about IMAX. The Batman sequel was the first feature film that was partially shot on these cameras.
No one knew whether you could shoot action sequences in IMAX, because if you think about it, IMAX is generally a couple of penguins walking across a snowfield.
Before, these machines were only used in documentaries about nature and the universe.
But if you want that quality, you want that immersiveness, if you have the vision and you want to do it, it's difficult but not impossible, and he wanted to do it.
They were rarely used for movies because of their loudness, weight, expensive film, and lengthy development time. Christopher is completely anti-digital cameras and was used to waiting a day to see the result of his work, but it took 5 whole days to develop IMAX film. It also took over 15 kilometers of reel to get 28 minutes, which made the final cut.
It's about 9 times bigger, so that's why you get incredible resolution in the IMAX format.
The $185 million budget allowed Nolan to pay for any whim, but there were still unexpected expenses. While shooting the Joker's chase, stuntmen broke one of the 4 existing IMAX cameras in the world, which cost $500,000.
All you care about is money. This town deserves a better class of criminal.
As for innovation, Christopher insisted that most of the Batman's recognizable traits be upgraded. Though a new suit is an obvious choice, it appeared out of a desire to contemporize the design.
It'll be lighter, faster, more agile. Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
For the same reason, Wayne Tower was changed and resulted in a totally new retreat for the superhero. The cave was lit by 800 bulbs, which used 1.5 megawatts.
Oh yes.
After 6 months of shooting, the movie went to the editing stage, where it spent another 6 months. The soundtrack is especially impressive, and the result of much experimenting by Hans Zimmer.
I didn't want to write a summer blockbuster, happy, indulgent score. I wanted something that was truly provocative and people could truly hate.
James Newton Howard composed a sparkling piece of music for Harvey Dent, which purposefully contrasted with Two-Face.
And I promise you, the dawn is coming.
The scenes with the Joker include piano strings being played by razor blades.
I was trying to get it down to the most minimal thing that could say exactly what I wanted to say.
Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
And the guitar being played by pieces of metal.
Now I see the funny side. Now I'm always smiling.
Heath Ledger's fans and family members around the world are in a state of shock. The 28-year-old Oscar nominee was found dead in the New York City apartment he rented on Tuesday.
Of course, the unexpected death of Heath Ledger eclipsed any interest in the shooting process. This terrible event has been discussed for over a decade, and it's worth shedding some light on the situation and dissolving the popular myths. Heath was not using the Stanislavski method, wasn't writing diaries in the Joker's name, and wasn't suffering from depression while filming. His colleagues often remember seeing him in a wonderful mood, and can recount many funny stories with him.
He was so confident, he was so proud of that role. He was really excited for that film to come out.
The actor's parents confirm this as well. His sister, meanwhile, insists that despite his history with drugs, the overdose on sleeping pills was an accident, as he truly had pervasive insomnia. It's not worth picking at the details of the subject. Better to rejoice at the opportunity to bask in the genius of the talented actor.
For any of us lucky enough to work with him, I think for any of us lucky enough to enjoy his performances, he will be eternally missed, but he will never be forgotten.
The movie was dedicated to the memory of Heath Ledger and Conway Wycliffe, a stuntman who, while rehearsing a chase scene with the Joker, crashed and died because of his wounds. The film premiered on the 17th of July, 2008. In the 6 days, The Dark Knight reaped more profit than its predecessor, and by the end of its box office return, it had made more than $1 billion. This was a record for a DC screen adaptation, and the highest grossing film at the box office overall that year. It was nominated for 8 Oscars, but luck turned her back on Nathan Crowley's set design and Wally Pfister's cinematography, as well as all the other technical nominations with the exception of sound editing.
The Dark Knight, Richard King.
And the last but not least, one of the most important wins in the history of the Academy Awards.
And the Oscar goes to Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight.
Was Heath Ledger's posthumous win of the Best Supporting Actor for playing the Joker.
Tonight we are choosing to celebrate and be happy for what he has achieved.
It's another day to live another fairy tale. It's another night to drink and then forget. Oh no,
The year was 2009, the Oscars. The Dark Knight receives 8 nominations, but no mention of the director's name. The Academy once again passed over Christopher's candidacy.
How can $1 billion be unsophisticated? Everyone went to see The Dark Knight.
Despite the success of his films, his only nominations remained the one for Best Screenplay for Memento. By the way, not long before the Batman sequel came out, a remake of Memento appeared in Bollywood.
अब ये कुछ भी याद नहीं रख पाता है. इस बीमारी को हम कहते हैं short-term memory loss.
However, the Nolans were neither warned, nor mentioned in the credits, nor paid a cent. Thankfully, the conflict never made it to the courts, because when the producers found out that the director was not pleased, they contacted him and smoothed things over.
At least you're being honest about ripping me off.
Well, you're not going to remember anyway.
In the summer of 2009, Christopher lost his place as star of the family. His older brother ended up in the epicenter of a plot worthy of any crime thriller. Threats, abduction, murder, and an attempted escape from prison. It all began 4 years older when Matthew, under a false name, met Robert Cohen, an accountant from Costa Rica who was connected to a drug cartel. According to the authorities, Cohen owed a huge amount of money, and Nolan was hired to return it. Matthew arrived in Costa Rica. Within a day, the accountant vanished, and a week later was found dead. By that time, Matthew had left the country, and the police weren't able to catch his trail. In 2009, Nolan appeared at a hearing regarding his bankruptcy and was detained and supposed to be extradited to Costa Rica, but the Chicago courts didn't confirm the accusations presented by their South American colleagues and rejected the appeal. Nonetheless, he was in danger of serving time in his homeland since they found a rope of sheets tied together in his cell, as well as some lockpicks. Lucky for Nolan, his lawyers were able to get the charges lifted, and a few years later, Matthew even tried to sue for financial compensation for the time he was unlawfully held in custody. Christopher didn't comment on the situation, and the press soon refocused on a story that would have been the envy of any thriller's plot. To tell the story of Inception, we have to go back in time.
Like that.
After the release of Insomnia, Christopher was taken with the idea of conscious dreams. Every movie theater was showing movies about illusionary worlds, and still under the effect of The Matrix, The 13th Floor, and Dark City, he decided to write a story that took place in the kingdom of Morpheus. At first, he planned to shoot a horror film and even pitched the concept to Warner Brothers. The studio thought it was complex, but liked the idea. Nolan began to write the script, but the process dragged on for 7 years. He would return to the text between shooting and waited for the opportune time. The main reason for the delay was not having enough experience with films of epic proportions. However, after the release of The Dark Knight, Chris became more confident and finally landed on an appropriate genre. Horror was replaced with adventure thriller, where multi-layered dreams were likened to the stages of robbing a bank. One would think that after the smashing success of the previous movie, Warner would agree to any project of Nolan's, but the executives were deterred by the complexity of the narrative and lack of literary base. The director had only written his debut film by himself. The rest, he had based on comics, stories, and novels. Also, when writing the script for Inception, he didn't utilize any scientific research about dreams, just his personal experience.
A lot of what I find you want to do with research is just confirming things you want to do. If the research contradicts what you want to do, you tend to go ahead and do it anyway. So at a certain point, I realized that if you're trying to reach an audience, being as subjective as possible and really trying to write from something genuine is the way to go.
In order to convince the studio to back the project, Nolan demonstrated how one could easily understand the layers. The first was rain, the second, night at the hotel, and the third, the snowy mountain range. But Warner gave Inception the green light only after Christopher promised to make a third installment of Batman. Also, Nolan convinced Leonardo DiCaprio to join the project, whose name guaranteed commercial success.
It is possible.
Leo was Christopher's only candidate for the lead role. He never imagined anyone else as playing Dom Cobb. The director had already communicated with DiCaprio about participating in his other projects, but just couldn't seem to find the right fit. This time, DiCaprio was inspired by the premise, which reminded him of Memento and Insomnia, but on steroids.
Hey, how are you? How you doing, huh?
The actor plunged into the preparation and even convinced Nolan to change the structure of the narrative.
You asked me for Inception. I do hope you understand the gravity of that request.
Leonardo and Christopher spent 2 months rewriting and enhancing the screenplay.
The work DiCaprio did on his character with Chris made the movie less of a puzzle and more of a story of a character audiences could relate to.
If you jump, you're not gonna wake up, remember? You're gonna die. Now just step back inside. Come on.
But DiCaprio wasn't the only one Nolan had envisioned in a role. The director had dreamed of working with Ken Watanabe, again after his cameo in Batman Begins.
Impressive.
The actor's charisma amazed him, so Chris wrote a role specifically for him.
Do you want to take a leap of faith? Or become an old man, filled with regret?
As for Michael Caine, he took part in the 4th of Christopher's films in a row.
So you want me to let someone else follow you into your fantasy?
It so happens that Caine accidentally gave away the main spoiler of the movie. During an interview with BBC Radio 1, Michael was saying how he couldn't tell the difference himself between the dream and reality sequences, and asked the director to help him. Chris answered him in one sentence.
Well, when you're in the scene, it's reality.
Another longtime friend for whom Christopher reserved a role was Cillian Murphy.
If this is a dream, I should just kill myself to wake up, right?
Later, luck favored Nolan in his search for fresh faces.
Pleased to meet you.
Ellen Page was admitted to the project without an audition. The director explained the premise to the actress, and when he saw her keen interest, realized that he had found what he was looking for.
Mind telling your subconscious to take it easy?
It's my subconscious. Remember, I can't control it.
Dilip Rao and Tom Berenger also happily joined the project.
Those bastards have been at me for 2 days.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, on the other hand, was a second choice. Chris chose him after James Franco turned down his offer and decided to do Danny Boyle's 127 Hours.
That's for sure.
Nolan chose Tom Hardy because of his part in Rock'n'Rolla, though the actor thought that it was because of his part in the drama Bronson.
My name's Charles Bronson. And all my life I've wanted to be famous.
It was only during shooting that he realized that Chris had never even seen Winding Refn's film.
Great. Thank you.
Nolan also convinced Marion Cotillard to join the cast, and her role eventually made it into the cinematographer's list of the top femme fatale.
I don't believe in one reality anymore. So choose. Choose to be here. Choose me.
There was, of course, one more new face. Christopher's son Magnus made his debut in this film. Nolan got the cast together, and while the decorations were being prepared, explained to the actors the thousands of symbolic references in the screenplay, present even in the names of the characters. The hero is Dom Cobb. The name Dom was borrowed from the Russian word for home, and reveals the protagonist's desire to return there.
When are you coming home, Dad?
How would you like to go home?
I know how much you want to go home. I think I found a way home. I need to get home. That's all I care about right now.
And I've got to get back home. You need the simplest version of the idea in order for it to grow naturally in your subject's mind. It's a very subtle art. Are you all right, Mr. Cobb?
Cobb is the last name of a famous American architect who designed skyscrapers. That is why Dom's limbo is filled with them.
You built all this? This is incredible.
We built for years.
Cobb was also the main character in Christopher's first full-length film.
My name's Cobb.
Mal means bad or unlucky in both Spanish and French, and clearly identifies her role in the story.
The death was the only escape.
Robert Fisher is a nod to world chess champion Bobby Fischer, and Maurice Fisher is an allusion to the artist Moritz Escher, whose drawings inspired the visual effects of the film.
See?
paradox.
Ellen Page's character is named Ariadne. According to Greek mythology, she was the daughter of Minos, who helped Theseus escape the labyrinth of the Minotaur. The film character does the exact same thing.
As soon as the music ends, you blow up the hospital, and we all ride the kick back up the layers.
But Nolan didn't stop there. The first letters of the characters' names spell out the message of the story. Dreams pay. Additionally, each member of the Inception team is a metaphor for roles in the movie industry. Cobb is the director, Arthur, the producer, Ariadne, the production designer, Eames, the actor, Sato, the studio, Yusuf, the technician, and Robert Fisher, the audience.
Pay attention to the strangeness of the weather, the shift in gravity. None of this is real.
In trying to write a team-based creative process, I wrote the one I know. Cobb. It's rare that you can identify yourself so clearly in a film. This film is very clear for me.
It's the chance to build cathedrals, entire cities, things that never existed, things that couldn't exist in the real world.
Another sly detail in the story is Edith Piaf's song. It doesn't only play upon waking up. Hans Zimmer explains that the whole soundtrack is based on pieces from the composition, which have been slowed down or sped up. Basically, the audience is listening to the same music the whole movie, which naturally weaves in with the dreams. All the music in the score is subdivisions and multiplications of the tempo of Edith Piaf's track. I was surprised how long it took them to figure it out. It wasn't supposed to be a secret. Even the timing of the whole film is an homage of sorts to Non, je ne regrette rien. The original track, which Hans Zimmer found in the governmental archives of France, is 2 minutes and 28 seconds long. The cinema version of Inception is 2 hours and 28 minutes long, and after the credits finish rolling, the song starts again. In doing this, the director added another level of film industry metaphors and compared the end of the movie with a dream from which the viewer eventually has to wake up.
I am impressed.
Your condescension, as always, is much appreciated, Arthur. Thank you.
Nolan not only found his inspiration in music, but in film also. He repeatedly called the movie On Your Majesty's Secret Service, the best of the James Bond franchise. This movie about Agent 007 inspired him to add in a winter scene. Christopher was also enchanted by the perfect balance of action, romance, and drama in that Bond installment, and he tried to replicate it in his own movie.
Now, before you bother telling me it's impossible.
No, it's perfectly possible. It's just bloody difficult.
Another source of innovation were the Japanese anime Akira and Paprika, from which Nolan extensively borrowed imagery.
Feel that?
In the middle of July 2009, Chris traveled to Tokyo, where he began shooting. After a few scenes in Japan, the team relocated to Great Britain, where they built sets which baffled the imagination.
Listen, if you're going to perform Inception, you need imagination.
Again, Christopher chose to bring his fantasy to life, without graphics.
Let's just do this in post, and we all knew that we couldn't. It just had to be done properly in order for it to be a believable thing.
Though in a film where reality itself is in question, graphics couldn't be avoided. In most cases, the CGI only enhanced the special effects, but did not replace them. He favored creativity over green screens, and one of the most impressive feats was the rotating corridor. The technology was inherited directly from Space Odyssey.
And I like the idea of repurposing that technology and really trying to choreograph an entire fight sequence.
and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, along with a team of stuntmen, spent 2 weeks in it.
It was like some incredible torture device. We thrashed Joseph for weeks, but in the end, we looked at the footage, and it looks unlike anything any of us had seen before. The rhythm of it is unique, and when you watch it, even if you know how it is done, it confuses your perception.
However, it was the combination with CGI which made this scene so spectacular. There were hundreds of cables and suspended objects, which were imitating zero gravity. This was the result of Nolan's vision regarding the marriage of special effects and computer graphics. Trains on the road, waves on the streets, Escher's actual staircase, and the explosion in the square. The only scenes which were completely computer generated were the ones in Limbo and the scene by the bridge. The Infinity Mirror refers to Nolan's earlier works, Doodlebug, and the Memento poster. The chase and fall from the bridge were filmed over 4 months in Los Angeles, and actors falling in slow-mo spent a whole day in the minivan. The film crew faced its final hurdle in Canada, where they built the set of the fortress. But November of 2009 turned out to be abnormally warm, and 2 days before the arrival of the actors, Christopher's location manager sent him photos of a set covered in dirt instead of snow.
About a week before we went to Canada, there was no snow. The whole thing was built around snow, and so we were very, very tense.
Luckily, a day later, Alberta got the worst snowstorm it had seen in decades. Thanks to several similar strokes of luck, Nolan was able to finish filming early and save 10% of the budget.
Is it possible?
Of course not.
In the editing stage, representatives